Hey guys, we're back, episode 2. Before we get going, I wanted to maybe give a couple of personal details. I don't know if it matters or not, but I maybe give some context or whatever. I'm a boiler operator by trade. I went to Fair State University for the HVAC program. I did the 2-year associate's degree, got out. I worked for a year as a contractor in Michigan. Hated it. I hated the windshield time. You never know when you're going to be home. You're whatever the weather is. Like you only work in bad weather. You're always outside when it's the worst possible time of year and all that stuff. So I didn't do that very long, and I went inside, as we call it in the trades. I started working I got a job at a pretty good sized community college, running their boiler plant there. And then that's what I've done my entire career. I did 5 years at another really big Big Ten school in Michigan at one of their power plants. I was there for 5 years. After that, I went to another college, which was a lot closer to home, better commute, better schedule, all that stuff. But steam boilers and steam production is what I have focused my career on for the last 10 or 12 years. It's not what I wanted to do with my life, for sure. Ever since I can remember, I wanted to be a teacher and I wanted to be a writer. So I don't know if I'm going to get into like how all that happened, because a lot of it's not relevant, but I think it's important maybe for some people to know between like these videos and my blog and then the like the professional writing that I do, that like I don't have theological training. I don't even have writing training actually. So I'm doing the best I can and winging it, and I just study a lot because I'm a mega nerd. So yeah. So we left off with me kind of getting out of the dark stuff and going into the exact opposite side. Bob Marley, Led Zeppelin, all that stuff. So one of the underlying like themes that carried me through really like a decade of searching was this idea that Socrates had of know yourself, know thyself. And that made a lot of sense to me, and I latched onto that really hard. And it kind of split the journey it was like 2 paths. One of those was like God, religion, stuff like that. And the other side of it was just me. Like, what can I find out about myself? Like, what can I know about who I am and why I do the things I do? And so that was like a big mix of like, there's psychology. Like I got way into Myers-Briggs testing and a bunch of the other different kinds of personality tests. Whatever was out there that could like kind of give you clues about who you were, or whatever. I was super into that stuff, so I did a lot of that. I took pretty heavy psych classes the first time I went to college, and even thought about maybe becoming a psychologist. But mostly it was just because I was interested in that stuff and like how the mind worked and how my mind worked and whatever. So but that know thyself idea, like that carried me, that was the current, I think, that like carried me through a lot of this stuff. So when I got into the long hair, I had long hair. I got into all of that stuff. That was still at the core of it, and which was like a search for truth, but it was truth about myself. And then I think consciously or subconsciously, the idea was that once I know enough about who I am, then I can sort of orientate myself towards, God, whatever that thing is, the universe, whatever, And I think that was kind of my thinking for several years. So I got into shamanism because when I looked at a lot of the different like options within the New Age movement and within sort of those like naturalistic belief systems, shamanism was still around. Like there were still shamans out there 10 years ago. There are shamans right now today. So it wasn't like it was an ancient thing that, I had to like become like Indiana Jones to figure it out, right? Like there were people doing this still. And it made sense to me that if you were going to buy into that type of like philosophy or, you know, system of belief, that again, you go all in, and the way to go all in is to be the guy that does, you know, the tribal communal worship, all of that stuff. Mircea Eliade says that the shaman is the sanctioned madman. So like he exists outside of the tribe, and he does things and gets away with things that the, you know, the individuals in the tribe can't do, but he does that for their benefit, right? So like he lives alone, they're solitary people, they're outside of the community, but it's because they have to be. And all of that really appealed to me, right? Because so much of the journey up to that point was just me trying to figure things out. I didn't really want anybody's help, because so much of what I come across, I was like, this is dumb, or like these people aren't serious about this stuff. So like I just never found anybody that I was like, I can trust that person to, you know, help me or whatever. So like the shamanism thing was it was not just like, I don't know how to put it the right way, but for me at least, it started with learning how to do shamanic journeys, which was typically done with like it's a specific drum rhythm that actually there's like science behind it, that it does kind of sync your brain into different, you know, wavelengths or whatever the case is, T waves and stuff like that. So there's like that part of it, which is a lot like, it depends on your definition within the church, but either meditation or contemplation, where you really sort of enter this imaginative space. Like Ignatius kind of talks about imaginative prayer quite a bit, and that is the closest thing that I could, you know, compare that to is that imaginative prayer of Ignatian spirituality. But I had an entire map of this place that I went to when I would do these shamanic journeys, and it's a lot of it wasn't like I made it up as I went along. It was like things that were presented to me, or things that I legitimately discovered in these, you know, wherever these places are, whether it's in the subconscious part of my mind that's producing it, or if, you know, I don't know. But, you know, I had actual maps and stuff. Like I still have the journal, I think, that has all of that information in it. The other thing that I got really into really early on was like finding your power animal, or like their spirit guides, totems, you know, kind of interchangeable ideas. But mine's was a bear. I don't know, I have a bear tattoo with a drum right here because of that. And it wasn't just me that was doing this stuff. Like I kind of dragged a bunch of my friends into it with me. And we were all kind of on the same page about it. Like we were like 14, 15, 16 right in there. But like back then you could buy things on the internet that you can't buy on the internet very easily anymore. Like you could get Salvia divinorum, which is it's a psychedelic type of plant that is used mostly in Mexico by the shamans down there and other people. It got really popular because they would extract it, so you'd get this extremely strong version of the plant, which I don't agree with. Like I didn't agree with it then. I don't agree with it now for different reasons. But like we would get these huge bags of raw salvia leaf, and just roll them up and chew them, just like the native Mexicans did. Like that's how those guys did it. That was how I was gonna do it. So there was a lot of stuff like that. We would get like raw tobacco, which is like certain cultures, they call it mapacho, stuff like that. We're just raw, unprocessed tobacco, nothing like cigarettes that we have here, anything like we have here at all. And like I would chain smoke those to the point that I would like get sick, but that was part of the point, was that like tobacco is a medicine. But you know, there's an old saying I picked up somewhere that white man's medicine makes you feel good first and then makes you sick after, and then the native medicine makes you sick first, makes you feel better after. And if anybody's ever taken like peyote or ayahuasca or any of those kinds of things, that is pretty much how that goes. So that ball rolled for a long time. That was probably like 3 years, 4 years that I was really serious about that stuff. And I was developing my own sort of shamanic practice because I didn't have a shaman to apprentice under. That's sort of the way that works. There's like 2 ways to become a shaman. One of them is to like get hit by lightning, legitimately. That's a thing. Or you have like a death experience, like you die, or they think you're dead, and then you come back, and then everyone's like, that guy has been to the other side, so he's qualified now to be a shaman. The other way is probably more normal, is you learn from another shaman. It wasn't really an option for me, so I did as much research as I could. I kind of just pulled things from different practices that I found. I had a drum. I had my own like drum, like a medicine drum that I had that was mine. I made different things like rattles for ceremonies and stuff like that, and really just like winging it hardcore, man. I had a bunch of white sage and all different kinds of things like that. I did some like stone work and whatever, but eventually it really turned into trying to like get into like how deep can you go with the psychedelic experience and completely sober. Like how far can you actually go? And that's when I really got into people like Terence McKenna, who is a wild guy. He's worth reading about just because he's interesting, legitimately. And him and his brother were famous for what they would call heroic doses of things like psychedelic mushrooms. I mean, you may or may not have a reference for this, but like grams of mushrooms, which is it's absurd. Like it's wild, man. So they had some really intense, crazy experiences. That if you've done that stuff, or if you've ever had if you've legitimately like drummed yourself into a trance, you'll read things like that and you'll be like, yeah, I get that. Like I can understand how that works and how that happens. People that are outside of those kinds of things, I think, tend to think that it's all either chemical or like your like brain is weak, like your mind is weak, so you're like easily influenced or whatever. You talk to people that have been through things like that, and it's pretty real. It's pretty real. There are certain things that are definitely, like, they call them hallucinogenics for a reason. Like, I had plenty of experiences that were objectively not real. I knew that. I was on drugs, but we had quite a few that were odd and stick with me to this day in some sense. But I was really serious about that stuff, to the point that like I was keeping journals of like, okay, like I took this much and like this is what happened, and that's what I do in my own prayer life now, is I journal. That's part of my prayer is having a journal. But I really looked at like guys like McKenna, there's a few more out there, as kind of my gurus to listen to and follow. The problem ultimately came down to that you can just like take more and more drugs. Like you can take 4 grams of mushrooms, and then the next time you can take 6. You can take 4 hits of acid, and the next time you can take 8, and the trips get longer and more intense. But like there's just a point where it's like I got to a point where I was like, why are we doing this anymore? Because it started to feel like theater, like spiritual theater. And it's hard to describe, I guess, maybe if you've never done it, but I began to get the sense of, like, people talk about mushrooms, organic psychedelics, like they have their own spirit and their own identity. I don't know. That could be true. I'm not sure. But what I had more of was confusion and less answers than I think I felt like I should have had, right? So, and nobody else really had them. So like I'd been at that stuff for like 2 years, and I started to ask questions like, well, how do we know if we are like doing this right? And the underlying question there was, what's the yardstick for like spiritual growth here or personal growth or whatever? And nobody could answer that. Honestly, I don't think anybody was really thinking about those things. So it started to look more and more to me like it was spiritual narcissism is essentially a lot of what that new age movement was comprised of. There were people that, you know, they liked the attention that they got from certain things, or, you know, even in some cases there's power that's involved, not like legitimate power. I mean, like between people, like you find somebody that you think is like a guru, a shaman, whatever, like that, you can give that person authority over you. And, you know, I've seen that, and it's nasty stuff. It's not good. But like I remember specifically talking to people, having very specific conversations about experiences that I had had during both just regular shamanic journeys, completely sober, and experiences I had had with salvia, which was a plant that I worked with a lot, and a lot of other people didn't because they were terrified of it for good reason. But it was a plant that I actually had the most experience with out of everything that I tried and took and all of that stuff. So I was really comfortable with it. And I had a lot of like just journeys, you know, behind me with that particular plant. And I would ask other people who would like, they were talking like they had used that plant and like whatever. And you start to talk to people, and it's kind of, it's, you just know when people are lying, and you know when like the experience that they're trying to put out there isn't authentic. And I just kept coming across these people that were like, they would just shut down, or they would lie so thoroughly that I was like, that's not true, man. Like, to the point that I'd be like, you either didn't take the plant that you think you took, or you never took it at all, you know. Like, there's a lot of that out there, and not just in the new age movement. But so I kept running into just these people that like, they weren't doing the work. Like, I was going on shamanic journeys like every day. I was doing all of this stuff that, you know, I felt like was important and whatever. And, you know, I spent a ton of time in nature at all hours of the day. Like, I thought I put the work in, right? And I talked to other people, and they're like, they'd you know, we'd have this conversation and be like, yeah, I had this experience on salvia. And they'd be like, oh yeah, I took that at you know, a music festival, and oh, it's crazy, man. I was like, that's not what I'm talking about. Like, I did this in the middle of the woods by myself, you know, at night with no one around, and like no fire, right? Like, I was in it. And the more I saw that, the more I was like, I don't see a path here anymore. I legitimately felt like I had exhausted it, and I didn't see the people that I had started that with. Some of them, not all of them, but some of the people I had started that with, some of the people that I met along the way, it was 2 or 3 years later, and nobody was any different. Some people were worse. Like, some people got into, you know, I lived through the opium crisis, opiate crisis, not the opium crisis. We buried a lot of people, man. Like, and some of those people were people that I, you know, knew from the beginning of that kind of new age thing, and they got into some just really hard, nasty stuff. But most of those people, there wasn't any sort of change you could point to. Like, their lives weren't better. They weren't better people. You know, they had dysfunctional relationships with other people. That was like, you know, what was happening really was like that 70s show. There's a point where, you know, if you're like a teenager or a young adult sitting around in the basement smoking weed and pretending to be a philosopher, that flies for a while. But there's a point where if you're serious about this, or you think you're serious about this, that stuff doesn't cut it anymore. Like, because in 10 years from now, you're still going to be in the basement smoking weed. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's got to be progress. There has to be something that you can check against. You know, if you can't look back in a year and say, these are the things that I learned, you know, these are the parts of me that I had to let go or die to, right? Like that isn't it's not just a Christian idea that like you have to die to yourself. Like the New Age movement, some of it we'll talk about ego death and things like that, but the underlying current there is that there's sacrifice, right? Like truth costs something, real truth costs something, authentic belief demands something from you. It's not a transaction. You can't buy it, right? Like Simon tries to do that in the New Testament, but there is a sense of like, this is going to cost you something at some point. And part of what I realized, especially within like shamanism and the healers and like all of that stuff, is it finally dawned on me one day that I was like, no sane person would want this life. Because when you really examine it from a historical context, for one thing, like a cultural historical context, anthropology, that's a miserable way to live. And then you read about all of the stuff that these guys have to go through, and it's terrible. Like the initiations and just all of this stuff is not fun. And you have to deal with all kinds of, you know, there's like spiritual attacks from, you know, entities and all kinds of things. And like, it's just nobody that really knows the cost of that would volunteer for it. It's not a thing, man. So it's kind of like it's a little bit like the priesthood in some ways, where it's, you know, it's part calling, part curse kind of. But you know, I'd see these people that were like, oh yeah, I'm a shaman. It's like, buddy, you do not know the weight of that, right? Like, so the more I saw that, I was just like, this is obviously not the right thing. And that whole New Age movement, there's a lot of good people there, but I think a lot of it is that they want all of the things that, you know, a spiritually accomplished person or a spiritually serious person has, without any of the things that it actually takes to get there. There's a lot of discomfort to be charitable about it in the interior life within Christianity. And you read any of the mystics and the saints, and they had difficult lives for the most part. Some of them were definitely worse than others, but these, you know, a lot of these people in the New Age movement that I knew and came across, avoiding suffering was the point, or the idea that, you know, the material world is like, there's this whole thing like the demiurge, and there's like a real God, a higher God, and then the God that made this world, and like suffering is this thing that you have to transcend, and all, I don't know, all kinds of weird stuff, but not very much different from the Catholic idea of like redemptive suffering, and that suffering has a point. These people do not want to suffer at all, ever. And the sort of like the best that their rituals got to be were music festivals for the most part, or like maybe a drum circle now and then. But you know, like these were the people, and I'm not trying to bash anybody here, man. I was one of them for a long time, and like a lot of those people were my friends. There's a few of them that are still my friends today, but like a lot of those people are the kind of people that listen to Bob Marley and will wear a Bob Marley t-shirt and have a Bob Marley poster and completely miss or ignore how deeply religious Bob Marley was. I mean, he was so religious that it killed him, essentially. And like, they'll listen to the song One Love and be like, oh yeah, one love, man. Well, what do you think that one love is? Like, where do you think that comes from? Or like, one of my favorite Marley songs is Iron Lion Zion. I love that song. That is a deeply religious song. There's a redemption song. It's literally in the title, man. Redemption song. But here I am surrounded by a bunch of middle-class white kids who are like completely missing what made Marley Marley. Like, they've turned it into the soundtrack of, kids in basements smoking weed, essentially. So that's kind of if I had to paint a picture of that whole time, that would kind of be it, right? It was just like, you want Marley, but you don't want the things that made him who he was. So again, a lot of those people, they meant well. They really, they do believe that they're looking for the truth, and some of them believe that they find it. And there are elements, I think here and there, but I think it's rare, but here and there, of some kind of truth, or at least wisdom, but it is hard to find. And that New Age stuff is so easy to sort of commercialize and then capitalize on people's. Everybody has a need for religion. It's a fact. I'm not going to argue that with anybody. You can change your definition of it, religion, spirituality, whatever. We all have that need. And the New Age movement did really well at kind of pouncing on that and, pitching things to people that it was empty to begin with, which sucks. Like, when I've looked back on that time and a lot of the people that I knew, I don't laugh at those people. I feel bad for them. I feel bad for the people that are still in it, because so many of those people I met were genuinely good people that wanted to find, something that made sense to them and that meant something to them. Yeah, they didn't put the work in for it. Most of those people didn't pray, they didn't meditate, they didn't do, hardly any of that. So fasting was definitely out. I fasted all the time. But to be stuck in that darkness is not a nice place to be. And it's even worse when you don't realize that it's dark. It's one of the tricks that the devil likes, is to lead you out into the wilderness and make you think that you never needed the map to begin with, right? He puts you in the dark and then tells you never needed your eyes anyways. This is so much better. That's very real stuff, that sort of spiritual anguish and confusion. And you see it played out in people's lives, in their personal relationships, and the way that their jobs come and go, different things like that. So I got out of it because of that there was just no depth to it anymore. It was like being on a merry-go-round. It was a carousel. It was an amusement ride. It's at the bottom of it for me. It was just the same stuff every single day, over and over and over again, and there was nothing any deeper. There was nowhere to go. I knew that there had to be something. I knew that I hadn't reached the bottom. And if it wasn't the New Age movement, it had to be something else. But that was three, maybe 4 years of my life that was tied up with that sort of philosophy and that kind of a lifestyle. And, like I said, I went all in, man. I had chunks of time where I went completely vegetarian just to see, which I used to be into bodybuilding. So, I ate chicken and rice and beef and broccoli and all that stuff by the pound. So when I went vegetarian, people were like, what? That's nuts, man. Like I said, I fasted a lot. I did a lot of fasting because I just knew that fasting was a good thing to do, spiritually. And people thought I was nuts for that. You think that you found people that understand you or can be sympathetic to you or whatever the case is. And I'd be like, oh yeah, I'm on day 3 of a 3-day fast, so I'm sorry, I can't eat. And they'd be like, why are you doing that? And I was like, well, I don't, it's just part of my spiritual practice, man. That's what I do. And nobody was doing that. That wasn't a thing people were doing. I would talk about, my shamanic journeys, and like I said, I do those every day usually. And people just were not doing that stuff. It really was about pretending to be spiritual. It was spiritual cosplay is what it was. And one of the big issues with that is kind of like I touched on, that you can sit around in your parents' garage and pretend like you've solved life's problems when you're 14. But if you are going to keep trying to like engage with other people and be serious about the interior life and be serious about a search for truth, there's just a point where that stuff doesn't cut it anymore. Like one of the things that I like look back on now is, just some of the like weird beliefs that I had, right? That like, oh geez, I don't know. This isn't what I believed, but just for argument's sake, like, aliens built the pyramids, right? And there's a bunch of people out there that believe things like that. So like, you'll believe that the aliens built the pyramids, but you won't give something like Christianity, which has 2,000 years of, history, spiritual practice, spiritual development, all of that stuff, the writing, there's writings of the early church all the way up till now. They won't give that a second thought. That's immediately written off. But like, you'll believe that the reason we haven't found Bigfoot skeletons is because they're interdimensional, and when they die, the other Bigfoots come for them and take them back to wherever. Yeah. So like, that's tough stuff. And it just eventually, like, I can't even really talk to people like that anymore, because it's just not serious anymore. I'm 35. It was interesting when I was 15 to talk about, like X-Files stuff. That's kind of what that is at this point. Is like, what you're talking about is like fiction on a level that is like, it's a TV show, right? Like, this isn't serious stuff that you're talking about, right? So there's a danger there that you trick yourself into thinking that you've made this kind of intellectual and spiritual progress, or that because you're talking about things that are maybe like fringe or like on the outside of more traditional spiritual stuff, that somehow sets you apart, makes you more enlightened, makes you smarter than everybody else, whatever the case is. That's not how it is. Like, there are plenty of people I came across that after I started to take psychology and philosophy classes, like just basic philosophy classes, and apply some of those principles to the conversations we had, those people, they were like, oh, I can't have that conversation with you anymore. I was like, well, like, we're just following sort of basic philosophical procedures here. You gotta like define your terms and things like that. Those people want nothing to do with that. They don't want to be accountable. They don't want to be pinned down. They don't want anything like that. And that's dangerous. That's not a good place for you to be at, because you never have to really believe in anything, which means nothing costs you anything. And anything in this life, whether it is the material world or the spiritual world, costs something. Sometimes it costs a little and sometimes it costs a lot, but it will always cost you something. And that New Age movement is more of, that's a debt. It's a debt that you just accrue over time, and it's empty. There's nothing really that's there if you stay with it for forever, however long. But that's really why I got out of it. It was so shallow. The people, I just looked at them and I was like, none of you guys really seem any different. Isn't that kind of part of what we should be trying to do, is like be better people, serve the community, or whatever the case is? Nobody wanted to do that. They wanted to go to Demph and Rothbury and whatever, which is cool, man. Like, go to your music festivals, take your drugs, but don't pretend that you're enlightened because of it. Doesn't work that way. So after that stuff, this is going to run long, but I want to kind of lead into whatever the next chunk of this is. After that stuff, I had to be honest with myself and basically say, all right, you need a system. You need something that has some like real tradition behind it, some real historical sort of like roots. It's something that is like there's progress, right? Like you can look at the guy that begins it, and you can look at the guy in the middle, and you can look at the guy at the end, and you can be like, yeah, I can see how you get from there to there. It's like belts in martial arts, man. That's like what I was looking for. And that was a tough thing to swallow, because I'd gone for years being so against anything that was systemic or rigid or whatever, right? Because especially like as Terence McKenna would say, like it's part of the old paradigm. You know, we can't have the old paradigm or whatever. Which is just like, as much as I liked McKenna, he was fundamentally flawed in a lot of ways. But that's another story for another day. So that brought me into the big two were Tibetan Buddhism, and then after that I studied Judaism for quite a while. And then it wasn't until after Judaism that I got into like evangelical Christianity, like evangelical communities. So next time we'll talk about Buddhism. I actually have Buddhist mantras tattooed on my back because I was pretty confident that I was going to be and stay a Tibetan Buddhist for the foreseeable future. That's how much that stuff like clicked with me and made a lot of sense to me. But I had my reasons for getting out of it, and I will get into that the next time. So I appreciate you guys listening to this. I know it's kind of long, but I did really want to, I know I probably rambled a little bit there too, but I did really want to flesh out the New Age stuff, and why I was in it and how I got out of it, because it's important for people to hear. And I've thought a lot about it over the years and about why I got out of it. And at this point, it's been 20 years since I was in that stuff. So I've had a long time to reflect on it, and especially to sort of pass it through the lens of the cross and of Catholic mysticism, the really like rich and deep history of sanctity within the church, the saints, all of that stuff. I've had this opportunity now to really kind of put that into a really clear perspective, and the people into a really clear perspective, at least for me. I'm not saying that like the way I see it's the only way to see it, because that is not true. But it is something I really wanted to be respectful about, because I know there are people out there that are in it. And again, I'm not trying to bash anybody. I was one of them. I was in there with you guys, so hopefully nobody feels too badly about it. I'm a knucklehead myself. You guys just don't know it yet. So thanks for your time. I appreciate it. We'll see you guys next time.